Good morning, good evening, good afternoon once again. KO European History students. Today's AP Euro lesson and SIGcast is unofficially brought to you by the Keystone Oaks Cafeteria. The KO Cafeteria has expanded their menu over the years to include a variety of tasty and healthy choices that keep the students of Keystone Oaks running strong in the classroom and into their extracurricular activities. The workers are always willing and smiling and happy to assist everyone with their nutritious choices. And let's not forget the uniqueness of one of the staples of the menu. That's right, Mr. Sig's AP Euro students have long boasted their favorite item on the menu is, well, you probably already guessed it, the infamous KO chicken balls. KO running back Michael Dower credits his pregame meal of chicken balls over this year's Seton LaSalle victory. And today's lesson will begin our coverage of a very, very important segment in European history, and that is the 30 Years' War. And this is 30 Years' War Part 1, and so just so you know, this covers the first two phases of the war, and the first two phases involve the Bohemian phase as well as the Danish phase. Stay tuned. Now, I figured I'd start you off with this 30 Years' War picture, this portrait, and if you look up it, a man hangs upside down in a tree. Others are stabbed to death or tortured. Somewhere in the picture, there's a man hanging upside down in a fire. Their womenfolk offer valuables to try to save their lives, or some try to flee. Elsewhere, women are assaulted and violated. In another image, the branches of a tree are weighed down with hanging bodies. And a religious symbol by this gentleman here is offered to the victim as the last thing that he will see on earth. The caption of this painting or sketch describes the hanged men as unhappy fruit. This could be today like Syria, modern day Syria. But ladies and gentlemen, this is Europe, Western civilization in the mid 17th century at the height of the 30 Years' War. And the artist who recorded these horrors was Jacques Quillot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it kind of sounded like I did, I think. And this gentleman was French, obviously, by the name, Jacques Quillot. But he saw the French army invade and occupy a territory between France and the German states, or Holy Roman Empire in Lorraine in 1633. And he was perhaps the closest thing that his time had to a photojournalist. But as you can see by this painting, and maybe one of the things that you can take comfort in is that the world is always messed up. So let's continue on. This is the territory that we're talking about here with the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. Predominantly happens in the state of Germany, or what we call the Holy Roman Empire. It was the most destructive war until World War I. The 30 Years' War started out as a religious battle between the Protestants and Catholics. The war started in 1618 when Catholic Emperor Ferdinand II of the Holy Roman Empire tried to impose religious uniformity within the Holy Roman Empire. Now, let me take a time out here. Anything that is underlined in this presentation should be continued on into your notes. Also, any of the slides that have green writing or this kind of green background, you're going to want to make sure that those are the official notes. There will be some notes that I've just added to hopefully, kind of supplement your knowledge, supplement your information, and help you understand the big picture even more. That is up to you of whether you want to take notes, but these are the notes. Like I said, the green slides with white, as well as the underlined stuff in the slides. Those are the things you're going to be accounted for, okay? So let's back it up. In terms of the Peace of Augsburg, in 1555, the Peace of Augsburg was passed. We know that Lutheranism had been given official recognition in the Holy Roman Empire. Lands of the Roman Church, which had previously been taken by secular powers, were retained by them. An example of this would be Frederick the Wise of Saxony. Any church property, any monasteries that had been confiscated by the Lutheran princes were retained by them. They got to keep them. And German rulers, as we know, could also impose their religion on their subjects. As the Peace of Augsburg said, the religion of the prince will be the religion of the people. Peace did not provide a permanent framework for religious settlement in Germany. A number of rulers actually, in the meantime, became Calvinist, as that religion or that denomination of Christianity continued to grow, and thus, at least arguably, outside of the pale of the peace, because Calvinism wasn't recognized by the Peace of Augsburg. So this is going to be a problem. Protestants continued to take over Catholic properties, particularly in North Germany. And the Catholics commanded a majority in most of the organs of government in a lot of these realms. And the Protestants came to trust these governmental bodies as basically a machinery of government, or a machinery of the Catholic Church began to break down. So by 1617, that's about 100 years after Martin Luther posted his 95 Thesis, it was apparent that the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia, Matthias, would die without an heir, with his lands going to his nearest male relative, and that gentleman's name was his cousin, Archduke Ferdinand II of Austria, who we've already introduced. He would become the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Crown Prince of Bohemia. And so what's going to happen next is all hell will break loose. There will be a direct violation of the Peace of Augsburg, and Protestant princes are going to unite, also receiving aid from England. And we're going to see that, balance of power forces will kind of unite and rally behind one another. The Habsburgs are going to rally Spain, Austria, and Italy, which are all Habsburg, and Poland, and push the princes back to the brink of defeat. And that's really where we're going to end with this particular presentation. That is about the end of the first two phases of the 30 Years' War. So as I mentioned in a previous slide, there was a direct violation of the Peace of Augsburg. Ferdinand was going to kind of institute and make everybody in the Protestant Bohemia, which, that he was going to take over, he was going to make them become Catholic. We're going to have problems on our hands. All right, there were some other things globally going on, or I guess I should say continentally, in which we said the balance of power was being upset, and Spain was beginning to flex their muscles again, and I should say the Habsburgs, and the Dutch didn't want to have this. The Dutch decided to support the Protestant cause because let's face it, they've been battling the Spaniards for independence since 1568. The other thing the Dutch were worried about is a strong Spanish presence on the Rhine River, which was on their eastern border, was really a strategic problem for them that they couldn't ignore, because it was going to hurt them with trading with the rest of the European countries to their east. Catholics and Protestants started to align themselves and really form alliances to preserve their rights. There was the Catholic League under a gentleman named Maximilian I of Bavaria. There was a Protestant Union, which was founded under Frederick V of the Palatinate. And again, Protestants, they were Protestants. James I, his daughter was actually married to Frederick V of the Palatinate, and he actually, believe it or not, at this particular time, did not come to the aid of his son-in-law, because he was fighting against the Dutch as well. So he figured, I don't want to send aid to my son-in-law when, in fact, that's going to be helping the Dutch. So that's kind of an interesting thing that will change a little bit later. And again, you don't need to write this down. I'm just trying to give you the big picture. Meanwhile, in Bohemia, again, we talked about Bohemia with John Huss and basically Czech Republic today. Bohemia, Moravia, and Austria, there was dissension between the Habsburgs, and it had enabled local elites to extort religious freedom from their rulers. And, that dissension, what that means is a lot of people, prior to this particular time in 1618, had gotten used to just basically practicing whatever religion they wanted. Nobody really enforced the Peace of Augsburg. So you had people that were Calvinists, you had people who were Lutheran living in Catholic domains, and it was kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy. But what we find is Ferdinand is going to be hell-bent on chipping away at these concessions and mandating that people in his realm become Catholic. So if you look at this slide, basically what we're saying, if you look, this is a world war. Don't kid yourself that World War I was the first world war. Various countries from outside the region interfered and actively fought in this war, and we need to note that millions will eventually die. So as I stated earlier, geographically, many people feared a strong unified Germany, especially under a Habsburg. The best case example of this is France. And France, during this particular time in history, is going through a regency, the regency for Louis XIII, led by this gentleman, Cardinal Richelieu, who's going to actually send aid to Protestants, even though he's Catholic. And again, France will support Protestant states in order to keep Germany weak, disunited, and weaken, as I said, the Habsburg Empire. Sweden and Denmark will also support the allies, the Protestant allies. basically to test their armies and to see how strong they are. So we enter the first phase. The first phase of the 30 Years' War is known as the Bohemian phase, and this is from 1618 to roughly 1622. It's not going to go well for the Protestants, spoiler alert, but let me just get into the situation. This religious situation in Bohemia was rather complex. Even though the Habsburgs were Catholic, many of them traditionally since the Peace of Augsburg had allowed a brand of religious freedom during their rules, especially Ferdinand I, Maximilian II, but also a gentleman named Rudolf. And then, of course, I already mentioned this gentleman, a guy named Matthias. And Matthias is the guy, if you remember, I said was going to pass away without an heir to his throne. And the Bohemian population was divided among a Catholic minority, many of them associated with the Habsburg court, and various denominations of Protestantism. There were also true Protestants, Lutherans, and Calvinists. As a result of the disputes between Matthias and his brother Rudolf, the so-called Brothers' War of 1609, and no, you don't need to know this, but the Bohemian estates had received a charter, something called the Letters of Majesty, the Letter of Majesty. And this contained guarantees of their rights. Among them were religious freedom. And together with the right of a committee of nobles, the defensores was basically ensuring religious freedom, privileges that were respected. The Letter of Majesty was ambiguous on one point, and it was ambiguous on whether the lands of the Catholic Church were held from the king. If they were, then the Protestants could build churches and worship freely on the crown's lands. If not, then the Catholic landholder could prohibit Protestantism on his ecclesiastical property. Okay, so there's some confusion here. Without heirs, Emperor Matthias sought to assure an orderly transition during his lifetime by having his dynastic heir, fiercely Catholic Ferdinand, later Ferdinand II of the Holy Roman Emperor, elected to the separate royal thrones of Bohemia and Hungary. Some of the Protestant leaders of Bohemia feared that if this happened, they would lose their religious freedoms, their religious rights that they had been granted to them under the Letter of Majesty under Rudolf II. So they preferred a Protestant leader. The Protestant they preferred was the Protestant Frederick V, the elector of the Palatinate. However, other Protestants supported the stance taken by the Catholics, and in 1617, Ferdinand was duly elected by the Bohemian estates to become the crown prince. And automatically, upon the death of Matthias, the next king of Bohemia, Ferdinand, faced increasing pressure from the Habsburgs to Catholicize, but also the Protestants of Bohemia, and they are going to rise up in revolt. And as we see here, the famous picture, the defenestration of Prague in 1618, Ferdinand, a little bit about his background, he had been educated by the Jesuits. And he was a staunch Catholic who wanted to impose religious uniformity on his lands. This made him highly unpopular in the Protestant, primarily Hussite followers of John Huss. We talked about him way back when in Bohemia. So the king-elect sent 2 Catholic counselors as his representatives to a castle in Prague in May 1618. Ferdinand wanted them, these Catholic officials, to administer the government in his absence. So according to legend, Bohemian Hussites suddenly seized these 2 Catholic officials, subjected them to a mock trial, and then threw them out of the palace window, which was some 50 feet off of the ground. Remarkably, they survived unharmed, and they landed in a pile of manure, which saved their lives. They deposed the Habsburgs and offered the crown of Bohemia to Frederick V of the Palatinate. So again, live action footage of the defenestration of Prague. Here's the window. And again, the first defenestration actually is kind of a Prague thing, when the defenestration of Prague involved 7 members of the city council were thrown out of window by Hussite officials. Again, this is during the time of John Huss. So I'm going to have to end here because 15 minutes is all I can do per episode. So please stay tuned for the next part 1.